الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمدًا رسول الله أشهد أن محمدًا رسول الله حي على الصلاة حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله
السلام عليكم. الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر الله أكبر أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن لا إله إلا الله أشهد أن محمدًا رسول الله أشهد أن محمدًا رسول الله حي على الصلاة حي على الصلاة حي على الفلاح حي على الفلاح الله أكبر الله أكبر لا إله إلا الله وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آل محمد وسلم.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. سبحان الله العلي العظيم والحمد لله رب العالمين، ونشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له، ونشهد أن محمد عبده ورسوله. اللهم صل وسلم وبارك عليه. اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على الحبيب المصطفى النبي الأمين المرسل رحمة للعالمين، وعلى آله وأصحابه وعلى آله الميامين وعلى أصحابه المختارين وعلى من تبعه بإحسان إلى يوم الدين. اللهم يا رب العالمين، اللهم اصلح لنا ديننا الذي هو عصمة أمرنا، واصلح لنا دنيانا التي فيها معاشنا، واصلح لنا آخرتنا التي فيها معادنا، واجعل الحياة زيادة لنا من كل خير، واجعل الموت راحة لنا من كل شر يا رب العالمين. In hundreds of hours of khutbah, I always emphasize our role I always emphasize the role that we ought to assume in life. Sojourners, travelers in something that we all know is temporary by its very nature, full of unanswered questions, but even more, unanswerable questions. We come to life, we spend time on earth, we leave, absolutely certain from the very beginning of this process that we will never understand the nature of time itself. We will never understand the nature of consciousness, that we will never understand the meaning of eternity, that there are so many existential questions. But what we do know is that, anchored in a belief in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, anchored in a belief that this world belongs to its maker, belongs to the one who have set the rules, created the process and is ultimately responsible for achieving justice, that our relationship with this Creator obliges us to witness. And in order to witness, we must be able to bravely see. Someone who doesn't want to look carefully will not witness. And someone who doesn't know what to look at cannot witness. And someone, as the Quran puts it time and time again, someone who is blind at heart, or someone whose intellect itself is blinded, cannot bear witness. Shuhada lillah, as Allah puts it in the Quran, witnesses but for God. We witness for God. In other words, we witness premised on the very natural, God-created abstracts of morality and ethics that God encoded in our universe. Every week presents us with an array, sometimes even overwhelming array, of situations and moments and instances that cry out for witnessing. Recently, I saw a recording, maybe most of you or all of you, I don't know, saw as well, of a Palestinian doctor in Gaza who is forced to operate. And what I could make out was that apparently he had to amputate a child's leg injured in an Israeli bombing. And of course, because of the Israeli siege and because of the genocidal project carried out by Israel in Gaza, something as straightforward, something that we all take granted in the modern age, such as painkillers, were not available. And the child died under the doctor's care from pain. According to the doctor, he said that the child passed away because of pain. And the doctor was crying and was being consoled by another Palestinian doctor. And you pause long and hard. I remember all the times that as a child, I had to undergo something as straightforward as going to the dentist, having a tooth pulled out, or having my wisdom teeth pulled out. I remember all the times in which there was some form of injury or another. And the whole situation, especially through the eyes of a child, is terrifying. And the first thing when a child is struck by pain is to look to those who are older, those who seem to understand something because of their age about the world we live in, the reality that we live in, and to expect from them a degree of relief. But in this video, this doctor is beside himself because, as he put it, the child kept screaming and he couldn't do nothing to numb the pain. Israel has made sure that not even simple painkillers are made available. Then you think of your own worldly affairs. That child that died, that doctor that witnessed, will this doctor ever be able to mend again? Some told me, although I didn't notice, that this was actually the doctor's own son. By that time, or after the first few seconds of the video, my concentration and my repose were all gone. So it might be very well that he said it was his son, but I was no longer able to comprehend or process. I don't know if people are aware of this, but even in the medieval era, even 1,000 years ago, human beings had natural ways, meaning herbs, of trying to control pain and numbing the pain. So that image of a child being amputated, fully conscious, without any herbal treatments or chemical treatments, and the pain to be of such an extent that the child dies, would have even shocked the medieval conscience, leave alone the modern conscience. How do you process moments of your own discomfort after that? How do you process having a headache and complaining that you have a headache and that because of your headache you can't work or you can't concentrate? How do you process your own impatience with hunger? How do you process any form of physical discomfort as you think of that poor child who died from agony, as over 1 billion Muslims in the world watch and can absolutely or will absolutely do nothing? But subhanAllah, one moment of testimony, one moment of witnessing is addressed and in fact often not explained, but elucidated by another moment of witnessing. And this might surprise some of you, but I'm sure all of you or some of you have seen the recent video by this racist fellow, if I can find his name, Stuart Seldowich. If you haven't seen the video, Stuart Seldowich used to be a fairly high-ranking member of the State Department. He was a deputy director for the Office of Israeli and Palestinian Affairs during the Obama administration, occupying this position for at least 4 years. And that's a fairly high up position. That's one of the positions that has a direct influence as to what the State Department recommends to the White House, obviously over Israeli-Palestinian affairs. But Stuart Seldowich was caught on camera harassing a poor immigrant working on a food cart in New York. What is of particular importance is what Stuart Seldowich tells this poor immigrant. He's obviously a racist. He is obviously an Islamophobe. He asks the man if he rapes his daughter like Muhammad did, and then he tells the man that in the hadith says that Muhammad raped Aisha, and that, of course, I mean, Aisha wasn't Muhammad's daughter, but anyway, it doesn't matter. It says, you rape your daughter like your prophet did. He tells him that some people use the pages of the Quran to go to the bathroom. He asks this Muslim guy, what do you think about that? The Muslim guy refuses to respond and just keeps saying, I don't speak English, I'm working, go. But the most important part for me in this entire interaction is that this ex-State Department official, like countless of the type that I've encountered in my career, working in various departments of government, when he wished to threaten that Muslim Arab, he threatened him with what? He threatened him with his fellow Muslims, fellow countrymen. He told them, I am going to take your picture and I'm going to send your picture back to Egypt, where, according to this man, the mukhabarat, he probably meant Amn al-Dawla or Amn al-Watani, but it doesn't matter because they often refer to all intelligence forces in Muslim countries as the mukhabarat. Mukhabarat just simply says means intelligence forces. But he meant the security forces. I'm going to send your picture to the mukhabarat where they will arrest your parents. And he tells them they will pull your father's fingers off. So in other words, he's telling him, the mukhabarat back in Egypt will arrest your family and will torture your father. And then, of course, he brags about the United States being a democracy and about the home country of this Muslim, where he came from, Egypt, not being a democracy. This is so remarkably telling. What is the connection between the Palestinian doctor that is weeping because the child died from agony and pain, and the racist ex-State Department official threatening an immigrant on the streets of New York with the mukhabarat? The connection would come fully to light if we would pay attention and carefully reflect upon the only text, written, oral text that we have from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If we pay attention to what God told us and warned us about, the way that God sought to educate us, to elevate us, to liberate us, in Surah Muhammad, Allah tells us about a group of people that claim to follow the Prophet ﷺ. A group of people that claim to have become devout, sincere, devoted Muslims. But then Allah introduces us to a rather complicated picture about these Muslims. These Muslims say, لولا نزلت سورة فإذا أنزلت سورة محكمة وذكر فيها القتال رأيت الذين في قلوبهم مرض ينظرون إليك نظر المغشي عليه من الموت. Their excuse for not sacrificing, and as we will find out, that the real issue is that although they claim to follow the Islamic faith, they do not back up this claim with concrete material sacrifices that alter the quality of life for them. And when they are told, why is it that you do not sacrifice? Why is it that your behavior, your conduct, is not consistent with your declared convictions? You say you're Muslim, but we always see you trying or slithering away whenever there is a moment that requires real commitment and real sacrifice. And their response is most fascinating. Their response is, God spoke to you, but it was before we came into the picture. A sense of self-importance that is delusional. Yes, we know that God talked to you when you were in Mecca. God talked to you during the Hijrah. God talked to you when you first migrated to Medina. If only God would talk to you again after we became Muslims. So that's the problem. The problem is that you want the ego-satisfying acknowledgement that God spoke after you became Muslims. Yes, we just want to know we count. If only God would make clear what is it that we're supposed to sacrifice. If only it didn't just come from the Prophet or from Imam Ali radiallahu anhu, or from the close companions, if only it came from the mouth of God. So God calls their bluff and indeed obliges them. But when God speaks to Muslims after these folks had converted, God says something that literally makes them go pale. All the color leaves their faces. Because what God tells them is, and the point here, qital, which means to fight. God tells them, you must fight for this faith. You must be willing to sacrifice the ultimate sacrifice by putting yourself and all your affairs at risk for the sake of this faith. So when God indeed did oblige them and speak to them, their reaction was entirely what you would expect. They went pale and wished that they would have not asked God to speak. But God follows us with one of the most fascinating ayat in the entire Quran. طاعة وقول معروف فإذا عزم الأمر فلو صدقوا الله لكان خيرا لهم. Ta'ah here is commitment, a genuine commitment, a real commitment. وقول معروف. To put it, an ethical narrative, a real commitment, and an ethical narrative. And you pause and you say, well, why an ethical narrative? Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling us from the get-go, there was no ethical commitment on behalf of these people. What they were saying was BS. And God called their bluff to expose their BS. If you speak, commit to a moral, normative order, commit to a clear ethical path, and in your relationship, especially with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And whenever I read Sadaqullah, it is impossible to be truthful with God, as the ayah tells you. So, a commitment and an ethical narrative instead of talking BS. And whenever you see truth with God, well, truth with God is impossible unless you are truthful with yourself. Translate truth with God as truth with the self, first and foremost. Are you really able to be honest with yourself about who you are, what you want, what you understand about your philosophy of life, about the nature of your own consciousness? If you are not able to be truthful with yourself, there is no way that you can be truthful with Allah. But what comes after that is nothing short of devastating. فهل عسيتم إن توليتم أن تفسدوا في الأرض وتقطعوا أرحامكم? What God is saying, do you understand? Do you comprehend that this type of people, the type of people who generate BS and actually believe it, the type of people who say we are committed, but their actions are far from a testament to their commitment. The type of people who say we believe in a cause, but have suffocating constraints on how much they are willing to sacrifice for the cause, or willing to have those they love sacrifice for the cause. The type of people who don't understand that the first thing that God will hold you accountable for is sincerity and honesty. The type of people who think that they can lie to God, deceive God, that they can play games with their Islamic commitment, pretend to be strong, committed Muslims, while in reality, they're far from. So Allah says, do you understand that it is exactly these type of morally compromised human beings, morally cowardly human beings, those who think Islam is there simply to comfort their ego and caress their excesses and make them feel good about themselves. Those who don't understand that this life is but a test in which we must prove ourselves to the one who made us, the one who owns this entire universe. Do you understand? فهل عسيتم that it is precisely when these type of people prevail, when these type of people are the prevailing reality of your day, what is the result? The earth will be corrupted. You will spout corruption. What will come from you is something rotten. تفسدوا في الأرض. And the bonds between you, will come apart. Why? Because you will learn not to trust one another. You will learn that your mothers, your fathers, your brothers, your cousins, your friends, your neighbors are liars. Everyone lies. Everyone pretends. Everyone puts on an act. And when lying and lack of ethical vision and ethical commitment becomes the order of the day, the bonds that unite an ummah, the bonds that unite even a family, will come asunder, will break apart. Surah Muhammad goes on with many, many other lessons. Among them, when Allah teaches us that to recognize these people, you will recognize them in lahn qawl, which means their logic is forced. They exist not to affirm moral commitments. What they say is counterintuitive to everything that you know about justice and truth and equity and fairness and goodness. They sound like players, and they are players because they're fake. But then the closing of Surah Muhammad, if only we would remember the closing of Surah Muhammad. When Allah says to us, ها أنتم هؤلاء تدعون لتنفقوا في سبيل الله فمنكم من يبخل فإنما يبخل على نفسه فإنما يبخل عن نفسه والله الغني وأنتم الفقراء وإن تتولوا يستبدل قوما غيركم ثم لا يكونوا أمثالكم. Comes to the end of the surah and the very last ayah, Allah lays it out in the most blunt and straightforward fashion possible. Allah asked you to spend money not to uphold the marketplace, spend money not to circulate cash, but spend money in Allah's way. And you be speaking to those people, choose to be miserly. But Allah puts you on notice that the consequence of this, the result of this, is Allah will replace you as an ummah. The entire Surah Al-Baqarah and Surah Al-Imran tells us the story of how the Israelites fell from grace and were replaced by another. And Surah Muhammad, among many other parts in the Quran, puts us on notice. But I beg of you, do you think the process of Allah replacing us with a people who will not be as defective as we are, do you think it will be painless? Do you think it will be agony-free? Do you think that it is simply a benevolent, uneventful replacement? People, what is happening to us right now all over the Muslim Ummah is exactly what a replacement looks like. This child that died an agonizing death, screaming and crying because there are no painkillers, there are no medical equipment, there isn't electricity, there isn't even water or food or anything, is paying the price for generations of dishonesty, miserliness, lack of commitment. How else do you explain the existence of well over 1.5 billion Muslims in the world? How else do you explain the fact that these Muslims are rendered complacent and ineffective and powerless? By what? By governments that are willing to expend monumental sacrifices to stay in power, In fact, these leaders of the Muslim world are willing to give up gas fields, oil fields, are willing to give up even territory, entire territories, are willing to give up billions of dollars, are willing to give up anything and everything just to stay in power. So it is not that they do not know what sacrifice is. It's just that they have very different priorities. Think of this man, the former State Department racist. He understands the logic of the Muslim world really well. We don't have to occupy Egypt. We don't have to dominate Egypt. But what we have to do is create in Egypt the form of government that has no qualms about torturing and silencing its own people. He's a racist, but his instrumentalities are proxy racism by the native to make the natives the instruments of the racist institutions. I will press a button, and you know what? His threats are not empty. That's precisely how things work all over the Muslim world. When he is telling that vendor, I will call the mukhabarat and have them pick up your father, he is not inventing a fantastical scenario. He is talking about a dynamic that has been going on since colonialism. I will get those people that I look down upon, your race, your type, to oppress you so that I don't have to get my hands dirty and I don't have to feel like I compromise my ideals for my master race. It is really painful. But do you hear even the Secretary General of the United Nations was talking about how after this conflict is over, how he doesn't want Israel to be in charge of Gaza. He wants the Palestinian Authority to be in charge of Gaza. The same Palestinian Authority that jails Palestinians, tortures Palestinians, gets its marching orders from its Israeli masters. What follows from this, and I'll elaborate on this in the second khutbah. It is natural for nations to rise and fall. But how long the duration of that fall, whether a nation disintegrates into oblivion, whether a nation is replaced by something, an alternative that it cannot predict and cannot foresee, it all depends on how a nation negotiates its descent, in the same way that the duration of ascent, the duration of the rise to the summit of civilization, is decided by how you negotiate your power and your supreme or superior standing, because that will decide in turn how quickly you fall. Whether we emerge from our days of darkness, how long we remain in our days of darkness, when we see something like incredibly painful, agonizing example of that doctor weeping, do we somehow exempt those who are most complicit in our subjugation? Do we think of Egypt and say, oh, Egypt is not to blame? Or do we recognize fully that you cannot possibly be a Muslim in good standing and be okay with the Egyptian government? That it is a contradiction in terms to claim to be a Muslim in good standing and in any way approve of what the Egyptian government stands for or does. Same thing with the Saudis. You cannot possibly be a Muslim in good standing and not clearly see that what the Saudis were doing with the Abrahamic Accords and with Kushner and with Sisi and with Markaz I'tidal, the center that they opened up, the center that Trump and Sisi and the king had their hand on a globe, that center is playing a horrible, nefarious role throughout the Muslim world. That's a subject for another khutbah, so-called Markaz I'tidal. Inventing a new religion. You cannot possibly be a Muslim in good standing and not be clear about the ways that the Saudis are complicit and responsible for the agony and the death of that child in Gaza. Why is it that colonialism can use Muslim governments as proxies for racism and subjugation? And one word: despotism. If these countries had any degree of democracy, if these populations had any ability to remove an undesirable ruler without resorting to force and without resorting to violence, if they could simply elect a ruler out of office, you wouldn't have the mukhabarat, you wouldn't have the Palestinian Authority, you wouldn't have the complacency and betrayals of the Emirat, you wouldn't have the disgusting Abraham Accords and everything that the Saudi government has done. You wouldn't have any of it. And I submit to you, if the Egyptian people elected their own representative, if the Jordanian people elected their own representative, if the Syrian people elected their own government, I submit to you, if Muslims were free to be autonomous, that child would not have died from agony and pain. It just simply would not have happened. Because Israel would have learned that if they mess with the Palestinians, then they mess with the rest of us. And that the elected governments of Muslims would tell Israel very clearly, if you're going to commit a genocide, then your fight is with all of us. أقول قولي هذا واستغفر الله لي ولكم وأسأل الله يستجب لكم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين وسبحان الله العلي العظيم. اللهم صل وسلم وبارك على الحبيب المصطفى محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه ومن اتبعه بإحسان إلى يوم الدين. When I was in my teens, I would meet some old men and elderly women who were of the opinion that the West is so racist that in all the institutions that the West has built around the world are but instrumentalities for the racism of colonialism, and that we will not be able, Muslims will not be able to correct the racism inherent and embedded in the institutions of the West that define our modern world unless Muslims are themselves sufficiently powerful and autonomous to be able to resist this racism. And when you're young, I sincerely wanted to see a different world. I sincerely wanted to believe that these folks were conspiratorially minded and were misguided. I wanted to be successful in the institutions that define our age. I wanted to go to the top schools, get top grades, occupy top positions. At the end, maybe be a prominent official in the United Nations, have all the thrills and fluff that go on with prestige. Part of the reason that I wanted that is because I saw these people and I saw that they always end up in prison. They always end up persecuted. Their life is never happy. And so indeed, I did go to the best schools. I did get the scholarships. I did get the top grades. I did attain the highest positions. But that child who died in agony, and Mr. Stuart Seldowitz, the racist, the bigot, that said 4,000 Palestinian children dead is not enough. not enough, woke me up. In this late age in my life, I wake up and realize that all the institutions that colonialism built are but a mirage, but a thin veil for embedded racism that never went away. How else can you explain to me immediately after October 7th, Hamas beheaded children, Hamas raped women, Hamas paraded women naked, Hamas did, and it turns out not only that all these accusations are not substantiated, but if you read the Israeli press recently, there have been a number of stories published in Haaretz that not only the stories of rape and mass rape are not supported, but even the charred bodies that Israel offered, pictures of charred bodies that Israel offered to the world as proof of Palestinian brutality and barbarity and barbarism, were actually Palestinians burned by Israeli helicopters. It turns out increasingly in story after story that a good number of the Israelis who were killed because of the Hannibal Doctrine. And those of you who don't know what the Hannibal Doctrine is, it is a directive adopted by Israel that Israel claimed to have abandoned, but it turns out that they still follow it. Not to allow Palestinians to capture hostages and, if need be, kill the Palestinian and their hostage. So what happened is that Israeli helicopters bombed Palestinians and Israelis. It turns out that a good number of the Israelis that were killed were actually killed by Israelis themselves. How else do you explain that this is a country where at every level, on a daily basis, you hear constant affirmations of support and a fully declared intention to cleanse and wipe out Gaza of its inhabitants? Not something hidden, not something concealed, not something implied. Check out the program with Abby Martin, who goes and interviews Israeli children, and they repeat, average people on the street, Islam is a very bad disease. It is right to hate all Arabs. We need to kill all Arabs up to the last baby. You don't believe me? Check out Abby Martin's program. Check out Chris Hedges with Max Blumenthal, where Max Blumenthal lays out in tedious detail how it is Israelis who bombed other Israelis, incinerated and burned and killed other Israelis. Check out Owen Jones and his program. Every single day, Israeli media repeats genocidal proclamations about Gaza. It is not hidden, it is not concealed, but all of that is crowned with something truly unbelievable. When you hear Israeli children singing about genocide and celebrating genocide. This is a video of a song in which there's a group of Israeli children singing, "We will annihilate everyone in Gaza." I just want you to see, maybe all of you have already seen this, but in case you haven't, I want you just to take a quick look at how beautiful and innocent these children are. And then I'll tell you what they're saying. Okay, these beautiful, wonderful children are singing the following. Autumn night falls over the beach of Gaza. Planes are bombing, destruction, destruction. Look, the IDF is crossing the line to annihilate the swastika bearers. In another year, there will be nothing there, and we will safely return to our homes. Within a year, we will annihilate everyone, and then we will return to plow our fields. Within a year, the children sing, we will annihilate everyone, and then we will return to plow our fields. Chorus, and we will remember everyone, the pretty and the pure. We will never let our hearts forget a friendship like that, love sanctified with blood. You will return and bloom amongst us. We have now run out of words. Our soul still cries out. Our soul not only sings, today our soul also fights. One people, the people of forever, evermore. We won't stop protecting our homes. We won't be silent. We will show the world how today we destroy our enemy. This is what in law we call genocidal intent. Perhaps the hardest element to prove in the crime of genocide. And although the Israeli government, even just in Netanyahu, standing before the entire world and saying the Palestinians are the Amalekites, and we all know what the Bible ordered us to do with the Amalekites. If you don't know, what the Bible ordered is the complete and absolute extermination of the Amalekites up to the last man, woman, and child. Netanyahu got up and in front of the whole world said it. And yet, I hear the spokesman for Biden's government, when asked about Genocide Joe, his response is, it is the people who are living under occupation, the people who have no planes, no tanks, the people who have no means to just survive These are the people who are guilty of an attempted where, well, apparently the intent of genocide in some abstract universe. So it is the Palestinians who are guilty of the intent to commit genocide, while the Israelis who every day declare an intent to commit genocide, according to the Biden administration spokesman, it is ridiculous to accuse the Israelis who are actually committing genocide of in any way having anything to do with genocide. The reality is the institutions of international law, the institutions of our modern world, let me just emphasize this. The institutions of our modern world are a farce. All of it. The World Bank, the currency system, the United Nations system, all the various organizations under the umbrella of the United Nations, it is all institutionalized racism. And it is time that we Muslims wake up and understand there is no mommy and there is no daddy that is going to take care of us. We are the only people who can take care of ourselves. And while we must rely upon ourselves to challenge this world morally and to demand a revolutionary change in the institutions of injustice that prevail and dominate in our world, and that the path to liberation starts with Muslims liberating themselves from despotic, tyrannical, demonic governments that rule over them and that oppress them for the benefit of their colonizer. Allahumma afu anna. اللهم اغفر لنا اللهم ارحمنا اللهم حررنا يا رب العالمين اللهم حررنا يا رب العالمين واهدنا لأقرب من هذا رشدا. Allah, forgive our sins. Enable us to be stronger Muslims. Enable us to be stronger Muslims, more deliberate Muslims, more true and faithful Muslims. And Allah, aid us in liberating ourselves from our self-imposed oppression and to liberate ourselves from our external oppressors and to be in a position one of these days to come to the aid of our suffering children and end their suffering once and for all. يا علي يا عظيم يا رحمن يا رحيم وأقم الصلاة يا رب.